Welcome to Routing for Success, the show where we interview today's top logistics professionals, providing them a platform to share their stories and best practices. I'm your host, Emily Blair, joined by Jake Hirsch. Today's episode features Steve Ramsthel. This is Steve's second time joining us on the podcast. Jump back to episode 5 to hear more of his story. Today, we focus on DRO, conquering negotiations, and finding ways to increase the value of your CSA prior to sale. I hope you enjoy the episode.
This episode is brought to you by AP Equipment Financing. AP Equipment Financing can bring you the best deals on step vans, panel vans, cutaways, and more, deliver them straight to your facility, and finance them with low monthly installment options. Click the link in the description to this episode or visit apfinancing.com.
Steve Ramsthel, thank you so much for joining us here today. I wanted to start us off. You talk a lot about maximizing revenue. And before this call in our pre-interview prep, you spoke about a story where you and a BC ended up splitting and you actually discovered a lot of revenue that you were missing out on from working with that BC. Can you dive into that story a little bit and tell us what happened there?
Yeah, I definitely can. So I've been a contractor for almost 9 years in 2 different terminals in the Pacific Northwest. I did bring my BC from one of my other terminals south of the Portland area up into West Portland. And what I did over a period of time is I kind of gave the keys to the kingdom, if you will, to my BC. And I just thought, hey, he's got this one. We're good with DRO and all of the other things you've got to do. Obviously, you got safety compliance, you've got HR issues, you're hiring people, her schedule, all the things, the myriad of things that go on with being a contractor. And what I realized over the last couple of years is I had declining profitability. Now, we all know that declining profitability is a function of efficiency, but it can also be a function of inflation, which we know inflationary costs have gone up. And frankly, our ISP charges haven't kept up with inflation. So that's another story we can talk about later in the call here. But what I realized is as I had a parting of ways with this BC, and then I realized, holy crap, what did I just do? I am running these routes remotely, and I had not, wasn't really up to speed on DRO. Long story short is I dove back into the DRO, the dynamic route optimization, and took care and set the strategy around my route planning each and every day. And what I realized is that I had about 8 extra dispatches a week. And I was like, well, how could that happen? Well, how it can happen is when you have a BC that uses dynamic route optimization, but is not using the dynamic portion of it. And what he had done is just anchored these work areas and had made them just static. And so what had happened is with the freight, literally coming in a very, lumpy way, if you will, he, from a safety perspective, he just made basically 8 routes in this particular smaller CSA Monday through Friday. And that kind of covered, all of the bases, and it kept him out of the driver's seat. But it kept me overstaffed for most of the week. And then Saturdays and Sundays were generally up by 1. So long story short is I got in there, I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I am going to use the dynamic anchoring capabilities of this and let the machine do the work. This is, if you look at dynamic route optimization, it's actually being used by UPS, by Amazon, and by FedEx. The tool is fantastic. The problem I have with FedEx is the data. And the data, as we know, is a product of the FedEx management and how they put stuff in the system. But the actual tool itself is really good. So long story short is I was able to deduplicate, if you will, 8 extra dispatches a week at $400 a dispatch. That's about $3,300 a week. That doesn't include the fact that I deduplicated him because he was actually helping me with my business, making me more efficient. And then I looked at my gas bill and I was down 600 gallons every 2 weeks. So, I mean, I take that back. It's 600 gallons a month at $4 a gallon. That's $2,400 a month. That's, almost 30 grand a year. So you look at that and you're like, man, I reduced the dispatch, improved my profitability. I think basically found about $150,000 a year. And I'm also reducing my repairs and maintenance and all of those things by limiting those dispatches. But more importantly, what I found now is I was able to deduplicate some undesirables on my staffing. I think we all have if you were to stack rank your drivers, there's 2 or 3 at the bottom of the list. You're like, why are we dealing with that person? They come in late, their coding package is wrong, they're hurting my service, they're exposing me to accidents. And we all know that with Schedule L, which is really a shift of some liability of insurance back to the contractor, reducing your exposure to accidents is really important. So I also found that my employee retention is up. More importantly, my employee compensation is up because of the way I've designed my compensation. So my theme now is I want less drivers making more money. And so this turned out to be really good. And I go back and we own a consulting business, we own a route brokering business, but we also are heavily involved. I'm heavily involved as an authorized officer in learning the day-to-day. And I would say that you really don't know your business unless you know DRO. And now that I've got DRO down and I set the plan in a strategic manner for my DC, I look at it, but I'm not up every night doing it. But now that I'm using dynamic anchoring of the routes, we're down to maybe 15 minutes a night looking at DRO. So it's super efficient. And then that also allows us to flex stops in terms of the volume and to have one plan. So it's been fantastic in terms of a tool and in terms of the economics, and it also has forced me to be a better business person and an authorized officer.
Steve, when you first started working on the DRO, how long did it take you? I know you said you got it down to 15 minutes now. When you first dove in, what sort of time were you spending on it?
So when on that change, what I will say, the learning curve was a little steep to begin with. And I was a little intimidated because I was thinking, well, I've not done this for 4 or 5 years. So when I got my hands dirty for the first time, it took me 3 or 4 sessions at 3 hours each.
Wow.
To really understand the power of DRO. And what was happening is the default was, let's just make those anchor areas very static and then let the chips fall where they may when the freight came in. And that didn't work very well. And it didn't give me the efficiencies that I was looking for. So there was a lot of learnings there. And there was a lot of work about swapping, of we'll call it stops between work areas. And as I learned more, listened more, called actually RouteSmart, their technical help is pretty good, actually probably better than FedEx's, and they're easy to talk to. Then I started learning a lot more about the tool. And when I learned more about the tool, it basically, I say, this is an AI tool, an artificial intelligence tool. Let the tool do the work. And I had to give it a little bit of faith. In other words, it's okay to not draw boundaries in some of these areas and let the routes or the stops kind of plop down on your work areas. And what they do it in such a way where you do gain efficiency. So it's going to do it next to thoroughfares and roads. And it's going to, when you do dynamic routing the right way, it's solving for time of work areas. So basically what it's going to do is going to render up to you work areas with equivalent time, which is a function of the type of stop, the density, whether it's a e-commerce, non-e-commerce, and wait time for pickups. And the wait time is also included in each one of those work areas. And it solves for the end of the pickup window. But if you net out the wait time, they're all within 0.2 of an hour of each other. So I found it to be very, very effective in making sure that everybody gets equal amount of work every day, even though the work areas are different, because all work areas are very different.
And
If that makes
that absolutely makes sense, Steve. So a lot of people listen to this podcast that aren't in FedEx yet. And a lot of people listen to this podcast that have been in FedEx for 20 years. So some of the people that have been in FedEx for a long time now have BCs that they have a good relationship with. They show up on time. Overall, they do a great job. However, they have never audited their DRO and what their BC is doing with the DRO. How would a contractor go about that if they wanted to keep their BC? How would they go about auditing the DRO and making sure that they're being as efficient as possible with their dispatches?
So that's a great question. And in other words, what is the benchmark on what's right? And frankly, how FedEx does value the CSA from a negotiations perspective. And it's all about the number of dispatches, it's the total number of miles, and of course the labor weeks and other things that are market specific. So when you look at this and you say, well, what is the benchmark? What I learned through trial and error is it's the informed optimal. So when you go to create the route plan, take your configured route plan and then run that against the informed optimal. And in my particular case, I looked at that and that was my aha moment. It was like, oh my goodness, the informed optimal comes in at 5 and I'm running 8. Wow, what's the difference? Now, I will say this as a FedEx contractor, that the informed optimal in some cases is way too aggressive and probably not rational, because it may have people and it's not the number of stops, it's the amount of time. So my benchmark now is like, if you're running informed optimal plus 1 route, that's the sweet spot, because you're going to say, hey, that I'm going to embrace the power of the machine and AI against my data, if you will. And I'm going to go and add 1, right? And what I've been able to do by embracing that is change my economics significantly to where I'm actually making money every single week. And it's a lot easier. And now I have people that are going like, man, my routes are actually a lot easier. And you can do a lot of powerful things. So it's not just the dynamic properties of the tool itself, but you can throttle routes to X number of stops. You can siphon off large package and define what large package is. You can do the same with bulk and run a bulk route. But it makes more sense and you have control of your economics by understanding the tool. So I would say, back to the original, what's the benchmark or the baseline? It would be informed optimal. But then again, I'll say this again, is that I wouldn't take that for gospel, but it would be where to start. And to understand that when you look at the informed optimal, the placement of those stops is going to be solving for the least amount of time, the most efficient, given the stops and given the roads and the traffic in your area. So it does gather that level of information and serve it up to you. And I found it to be very, very helpful. Now, one of the things I always do is I believe in continuous improvement. And that's part of what, my corporate background is, think about continually improving a process or Six Sigma. And so what I've done now with DRO is I set the standard. I look at the model to see what the informed optimal is against the route plan. I do that in the sandbox version. And I give that to my DRO and say, hey, take that, run that tonight, clean it up. In other words, you move the bulk around or pickups or whatever it may be, but there's just a little bit of calibration at night and put that into production. And I've now I'm overstaffed and I'm now in a position in my terminal where I'm actually helping other contractors. So it's been a wonderful thing about my own knowledge about the business, but second is the economics are pretty amazing.
Moving forward, are you going to stay kind of involved with that DRO on a daily basis? Are you going to visit it on a monthly basis? What's your plan moving forward to remove yourself a little bit, but still be aware?
So I have now removed myself from doing DRO at night, but I have not removed myself from doing little tests or what I call betas in Sandbox a couple times a week. And the reason why I say that is that the work areas are changing a little bit because there's a seasonal effect to freight where it's up a little bit. So we know the first quarter is pretty low. Second quarter is a little bit, from a consumer and from a package perspective, it's a little heavier just because of the way consumer pattern is. Summer's a little bit lower, and then you build volume in the late third quarter and fourth quarter. So I think it's important to look at that. I don't think you can ever just say, I'm not going to look at it, or even once a month is probably not a healthy thing. So I am a AO that owns CSAs remotely. I live in Scottsdale, Arizona. My CSAs are in the Northwest. Why the Northwest is because I grew up there. I've got some elderly parents there, so it makes sense for me to go there, and it's easy for me to get there. So, and I have a great relationship with my BC. We talk every day. I think he needs to own the DRO because if something goes wrong, it's on him. Right. And we don't have anything going wrong, but from a leadership perspective, people need to know that the BC is on the ground working and obviously in control of DRO. And then optimizing that with Ground Cloud. So we've used Ground Cloud, and Ground Cloud's been fantastic in order to push that from an API perspective, application program interface, over to Ground Cloud, and then we do our scheduling there. So it's super seamless, and it's easy to make those changes, obviously the night before or even in the morning, and run the business. So that's been super, super helpful, is not only understanding Ground Cloud, but understanding and optimizing my Ground Cloud. Did I say that right? Embracing DRO and optimizing that, and then Ground Cloud and all of the bells and whistles there that have allowed me to run my business better.
So just to clarify, you spent 4 3-hour sessions understanding DRO. And by understanding that and getting rid of that initial BC and implementing DRO efficiencies, you now save about $150,000 a year.
Yeah, maybe 180,000
from a 12-hour investment.
Well, it's a little bit more than 12 hours, and I'll say that because I think I would say 80% of the learning curve was flattened in those 4 initial sessions. Okay. Then for the next 2 weeks, I was in there tinkering around with this with my BC for probably an hour a night. And then it was like the aha moment was, hey, this dynamic anchoring is really powerful. And everybody had talked to me before was like, don't do this and do that. But then I thought, well, if we don't use dynamic anchoring, I'm not actually dynamically routing based upon all of these different freight volumes, which drive you friggin' crazy because that's what comes at you in this business. So I can literally go to bed at night at 9:30 or 10 and know that using my dynamically anchored and calibrated route for the next morning, that whatever they do after that planning window closes in terms of that freight that comes through, it's going to land perfectly on every single one of those routes. But if I didn't do that, and what was happening before with my other management was everything was statically done. And we all know that after that window closes at night, that you might get another trailer in and that might completely blow up your DRO. Now, my biggest complaint with DRO isn't DRO. It's really around FedEx's ability to put the freight in the system at the right time and also getting a good number in the morning. So in the morning, I'm finding out that I could have a 10 to 15% variance in what comes over from DRO and hits the DSW, the data source worksheet, which then moves over to Ground Cloud. So that I'm not going to be able to fix, but I am going to be able to fix, I know I'm going to run X numbers of routes per day, and it's going to flex it. I can control my costs around that, and it's going to be done in the most efficient way possible. Now, what's been able, by unleashing that extra cash flow, I just bought a straight truck, right? And I bought three step vans. And now what I've been able to do is upgrade my fleet because when I did buy this second CSA up in the Portland area, the trucks were friggin' horrible. And in fact, I was running 11% of my revenue was repairs and maintenance. Yeah, and the problem we have post COVID is parts and labor has just gone crazy. In other words, when you look at the parts on a used vehicle and the labor rate, they're just ganking us, just killing us on that stuff. And when that breaks down, I not only got to pay that parts and labor, but now I had to have a BC run over there and go handle that administratively, hit it, or even rent a vehicle. But now that I've got 3 new step vans in that one CSA and a brand new street truck, my repairs and maintenance have gone from 11% of revenues in the last 8 months. I'm now down to like 2.67%. Wow. Now, the difference of that is going to go into payments, but when I'm going into payments, I'm actually building an asset. So I'm paying down an asset that goes to my balance sheet. So the valuation of my business, not only is my EBITDA earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization is better from a valuation, but I'm building my balance sheet so if down the road somewhere, if I want to sell it, I've got a business which is made up of a lot more assets and a lot less what you call blue sky or, just thin air, if that makes sense. So it's helped me to do a lot more things strategically, but I really had to get back in the game and provide that direction around my profit and loss statement. And the only thing that I had control over was my dispatch efficiency. Now, the other thing you got control over, to a certain degree, is how much money you're going to get from FedEx, right? My advice to contractors out there today is put less money in the vehicle brand promotion, like put $15 in there versus 20, 25, or 30. And here's why is I have elected in some of my vehicles not to do the FedEx decals. And the reason why is that is a billboard for a insurance claim. And here's why. When they see FedEx, they see big, thick, big pockets, right? And I can't tell you that I bet you people on this podcast going to say, how many alleged claims have you had? Now, under the Schedule L, if you have an alleged claim and you have no vetter, because vetter only get 30 days worth of data, you're going to get screwed because they're going to give you, because you don't have if they have a witness or an alleged witness and you don't have a video to back that up, that alleged goes to a preventable. And a preventable, as we all know, is going to count against your loss ratio, or we'll call it against your safety score, and can get you in a pickle for either from an OTC or just, money out of your pocket. So I'm just saying is that as an option, when you're thinking about negotiations, and you may want to reallocate money there, and then the next new truck you get, comply with the entity decals, but maybe not put FedEx on there because that is a magnet right now in a very litigious environment that we happen to be in, to draw more attention to yourself and get into undesirable situations, if that makes sense. So back to negotiations, there's money on the table in their back pocket. You want to make sure that you have the right money in the right elements. And then if you're going into negotiations, and now that we're in the metals program, they're generally going to ask you to put your unique characteristics in 3, 4, 5 months ahead of time. Make sure that you fill out those unique characteristics. But more importantly is you want to quantify them. And when I say quantify them, it's going to be basically time and materials around that. And then I would encourage everybody to also understand what their cost to operate is relative to their total revenue. Because if you don't understand your cost to operate based upon dispatches and labor and insurance and all of those things, then you really know what you're negotiating for, and it may not be adequate. And what I found is when I work with contractors and we do a cost to operate based upon assumed dispatches and things of that nature, which we can do in a very granular way. A lot of times we turn in those cost sheets to FedEx and they're like, whoa, this is done in a very good detail. And that along with the unique characteristics, and we're going to give you a bump. But if you can't articulate the cost to operate in a very granular level and just say, I just want more, they're just going to go say pounds sand. If that
makes a lot of sense. I see a lot of chatter saying don't bother submitting your unique characteristics because it won't get approved. You won't get any more for it. Would you say that's the biggest mistake that contractors make is not being specific enough?
I hear that a lot, and I would agree with a lot of it because I would say that most of us don't actually have unique characteristics. We just don't. I mean, because I look at they asked me to turn my unique characteristics. So like, I don't have any, because a unique characteristic as they define it would be a delay due to road construction that might be temporary. It would be a security delay to go on a military base or in our case, the Portland airport or something of that nature. Or it would be, I'm just trying to think. It could be potentially gravel roads and or weather conditions. In my particular CSA, it's like, okay, I'm in the West Portland area. I got 15 stem miles out to my delivery area. I really don't have any security delays. I mean, I get traffic and all that, but they've kind of figured that in. When I look at like DRO, and you look at the time and distance and what they're allocating for stem miles, it's pretty accurate. So in my case, they're really, I don't have any unique characteristics definitionally. I think what I see is that the terminal managers don't even understand unique characteristics, which is a term. And what I see a lot of contractors will say, well, the cost of business has gone up and I pay more for gas. And it's like, well, no shit. I mean, everybody's doing that. Right. But that's not unique. And if they don't want to pay for that, well, then that's another issue. And I think that's why it's always good to go back and do a cost to operate. And if you're not running EBITDAs, what I always say, free cash flow of 15 to 18%, then we shouldn't be in this business because it's not about enough money left over to pay for the capital expenditures and your time and effort and risk.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Routing for Success.
Steve had too much great information to pack into just one episode, so join us next week for part 2.
Routing for Success is brought to you by AP Equipment Financing. In today's competitive market, it is essential to acquire the right trucks at a fair price and finance them in a way that makes sense for your business. Leveraging their extensive network of truck and van suppliers, the experts at AP Equipment Financing will help you locate the best deals on step vans, cutaways, panel vans, and more. Deliver them straight to your facility and finance them with low monthly installment options. Click the link in the description or visit apfinancing.com for more information. Routing for Success is an independent production of AP Equipment Financing and is in no way affiliated with or endorsed by FedEx Corporation, FedEx Ground, Amazon, or any other logistics company discussed herein. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Routing for Success.